Star Wars The Last Jedi is a very interesting film because it shows us things that most other films did not. As I get into this film's narrative and messages, I will share my argument with you and how the film is working on different levels. To start with, one reason why people hate or don't like this film is because of Rose, but I honestly think she is one of the most important characters in this film, specifically other than the main characters that we know and love, like Rey, Finn, and Chewbacca. Other than those characters, I'm specifically targeting Rose, as she is the main character in The Last Jedi. So sit back and enjoy my take on The Last Jedi. Before I get into my argument on this film, I'll lay out the aesthetics of the film first. There were three particular scenes in this film that really stood out to me. The first scene I noticed playing out was this scene with Rey searching for answers about her parents. Notice how this scene becomes very self-reflexive in the sense that you see Rey multiplied. She's trying to manipulate her hand in hope of coming up with an answer. As the camera drags past the multiple same character of herself, we end up at the mirror and she's touching it in hope to only find what really is a reflection of herself. We then have my favorite part of this film, the telepathy. This scene becomes very abstract through this mediation at a distance. The camera really focuses on the hands touching, and then we see Luke come in and break the contiguity of this abstract closeness through space and time. It is very interesting how we look from all the characters from different point of views. We first see the telepathy begin, and we have Rey and Kylo Ren communicating, which is third person. And then we have Luke's perspective to see them touching for a second, which is first person. And then we see the very intense destruction as Luke yells stop and uses the Force to break up this contiguity. Kylo Ren shows Rey that Luke tried to kill Ren. This camera, which I would say is more of a photorealistic camera, brings the spectator into an overwhelming movement. For the final scene, which really spoke to me, is the major scene that speaks out. We have Rey in Snoke's throne room, and Snoke brings out this very intimidating and very imperialistic impression. With the closeness of the camera zooming in on his face, this film is becoming very overly intensified and self-psychologically motivated. Snoke uses his actions to invoke fear into Rey to push her to fear and make her realize that she was being controlled and manipulated, but she realizes it's too late. Kylo Ren kills Snoke and uses both Rey and him to fight and kill all the guards. Rey was still caught up in her centrifugal impulse and asked Ren to turn to the good side, but he tells her it is time to let old things die. This is an allegory for the franchise, the military, and, most importantly, my argument. All of these scenes are very important for the narrative of this film and the Star Wars franchise. I would say that all these scenes have a very common trait between them, which is that we need to be more open-minded, and we also need to be mindful at the same time. Star Wars and this film speaks to me in so many ways, and my argument is a response to this message. My argument is this: that Star Wars The Last Jedi is a self-implicating film. It is critical of our society in that we are caught up in the media through these distances. Through its technology, it is advancing and we are becoming more controlled by the media. Through neoliberalism, our society is controlled by the government. This film is seeming to allegorize social media in both the problems and the possibilities through its narrative. I am affirming the film's critique of society in the media and how we fail at controlling ourselves and recognizing it. Through its forms of mise-en-scène narrative, cinematography, and sound, the film affirms that we need to be open-minded and open our eyes to reality, and it critiques that we struggle with doing so. But there is always hope for future, and it can be a better future, and it's not the end yet. To put it in smaller terms, this film, I am arguing, brings in the contemporary term neoliberalism. I am not defining it fully. I am interested in this networking society and how everything is regulated through the market, through money, and capitalism. During this period of network, we are enjoying our technology, but we don't trust it, and we shouldn't. This film is telling us that we as society need to not be so caught up in the media. I am not saying we shouldn't watch and participate in the media, but I am saying we should be mindful of how we use it. The character Rey, I am arguing, is us in society, and she is showing how we become blinded in the media. The final scene I discussed with Snoke is a great example of how a capitalistic government can be. The Force is an allegory to our networking society and how it is all connected. Due to Rey and her character impulse, she wanted to believe that Kylo Ren would turn and join the Resistance. Snoke took advantage and was blinded and twisted their connection, which pulled Rey into his throne room. Luke possibly knew that Snoke was playing a role in this abstract connection, and that may have been why he reacted the way he did. Rey didn't take a hint and kept on. What would have happened if Rey did stop and not followed her impulse? This is a very important question. Remember what Kylo told Rey after he killed the Supreme Leader? He said that it is a time to let old things die and take things in our own actions. I will come back to this question. I'd like to bring up a major point first, and this is a controversial topic and a major reason why a lot of people are not a big fan of this film, and that is the character Rose. As I started out by saying, I think Rose plays a major role in this film. She may not be the main character, but she is very important. Rose talks with Finn about the military and how the First Order took away everything to finance their military. She then goes on to say that selling weapons to the First Order is how you get rich. The one character who directly talks about the military is the character people don't like, because she is someone we are not used to seeing in a Star Wars film. As the next film, Rise of the Skywalker, is the last film, it is interesting how these allegories of life are brought up. This film, I will argue, is telling us that it is time to look forward to the future and let our old past of Star Wars history fade away, but we definitely should not forget them. Our cinema is becoming more advanced. Remember that this franchise is what introduced the new cinema, the Hollywood blockbuster. I'd like to mention briefly one of my research sources that I found. It is titled Social Media and Conflict. It states that for armies, information is the power to accomplish specific missions: killing, wounding, capturing, degrading enemy systems, defending, supplying, and so on. A distributed network of semi-autonomous interlinked nodes deploys information to enrich itself with connection, processes, possibilities. The flows between the nodes are flexible, and the information they deploy sustains but also reconfigures the network, making it flexible as well. To me, this is saying that control and power is what the First Order believes in. The media is taking advantage of this in full force in the neoliberal period, and the military uses the network to communicate and get their weapons. This is how the Force in the film is used. As I mentioned money before, having all these mediums costs money. To have a military, to have a network, and to have all these missions must be paid for. Our world isn't always the greatest place to live in, and it is places around weapons as intimidation, and they use media forms to scare society. People are also using the media to critique this film, and it is very interesting. I'd like to also briefly talk about our younger consumers in the network. One major social media is Snapchat. Other media do this similar, but what Snapchat does differently is the attractive aesthetics. I personally don't use Snapchat, but I understand why other people do. I observe that many medias make consumers want to come back for more because of these attractive aesthetics of usages of all these effects. I'm not even sure, what Snapchat, because it's been so long. But I know like Snapchat was using the face swaps. They are using all these filters, to make this media look more attractive, that consumers are going to come back and keep spending their money, you know, and then this way that not only does Snapchat make their money, but this also gives an advantage to the government. The film uses many forms to show us that these self-implicating and self-reflective aesthetics. To go back to my argument, neoliberalism, social media, and the military are all connected. How we respond through media forms is very crucial, and we should be mindful. Look at how the film shows how Rey fell into a trap. Due to her self-motives, she was not taking any time to think through. To complicate my argument, the allegory for this future tells us to let old things die. As Rey did when and Kylo turned to the good side, so did the franchise. All the characters believe this, so does the franchise. We all love our technology, but we don't trust them, and we shouldn't trust them. We need not to be distracted by the lies of the media, and we need to be opening our eyes to reality. To remind, neoliberalism, social media, and the military are all connected, as I've said before. The government uses the military as a way of intimidation and becoming powerful, and then they bring in the media to communicate and become biased and trickery to manipulate consumers with lies and to make the medium, such as Snapchat, look attractive to us, so we keep coming back for more. As the next film, Rise of the Skywalker, closes out the franchise on a good note, so should we. Let's not trust the media. Let's search for facts. It is good to take risks, just as we do, but we also must be mindful. Rose is telling everyone how important the military is. The fact that the First Order took everything away from someone different in this franchise is very interesting. It wasn't Finn, it wasn't Rey, and it wasn't Kylo Ren who lost everything. This film makes us feel alienated, but it also makes us see that it is okay to accept changes and look forward to the future. To conclude this, my argument is that we should not trust what the media says. It is okay to take risks and learn, but we should take everything with a grain of salt. This film shows us that the military during this time of neoliberalism, our network is playing a major role in both the connection and the results of life. It is all capitalism, and our military and the media cannot always be trusted. Let's look forward to what Disney will do next with this franchise, if anything at all. Basically, as I've read everything, I was basically reading everything from a script. This was all a written script because I wanted to make sure, that I can be able to explain my argument as realistically as possible because there's so much. I'm going to go ahead and attach my paper in the bottom of the link in the description of this video if you guys would like to go ahead and read it in analytical form. But basically, I hope I was making sense because it is challenging to do film studies. And as I mentioned before in my other video, this is basically my whole paper, my whole analysis. And hopefully I was making sense. I'm going to try to go ahead real quick and explain everything in my own words after I've written everything. Because one of my things I struggle with writing is sometimes I can't always get what I'm trying to say on paper. Everything that I've been saying and pausing between was written down. So I'm going to try to go ahead real quick before I end this and explain in my own words what I'm basically trying to say. I am basically starting off from the beginning. And when I came up with this argument originally, I was not even thinking about, I never, this contradictory to my allegory, not contradictory, my complication. It's been a while. I was watching the film again, but it hit me later on to realize, that what Kylo Ren was saying actually is an allegory for the franchise and for us as society. Because at the beginning, all I was arguing was what Rey was doing. And what Rey was doing was being blinded by the truth. She wanted to believe that Kylo Ren had good in him. And later on, and this goes back to my allegory, it turned out that she was correct. But from the get-go, she was wrong because she ended up confronting Snoke. But it's interesting because it's all a messy, complicated story, and this is why I'm trying to explain it while I'm not reading. Everything else I was doing, I was reading, but now I'm just kind of explaining in my own words. It's all a complicated mess. It's not easy and simple, like, seeing that the sky is blue. It is how you interpret, it's how you analyze and how you see these things. And I am seeing these things and from my point of view. And these are how I'm seeing things. And whoever's watching this video, you guys may not see these things the way I do. But from this film, it is interesting. It's not my favorite film. I like not Last Jedi. I like Return of the Jedi. But what this film does that's interesting to me is not only does it use a character that we're not expecting, like Rose, and I get why a lot of people hate it, but it's also being able to show us, and how I'm making this claim, that we in the media, through the military, in this case the First Order in the film, is to say that we as society are controlled. Rose was taken advantage of. It's how they make their money. That's what she was saying in the film. She was basically saying that she is being taken advantage of, and they shunned her. I think if I remember exactly, trying to remember exactly what she said, but they shunned her, and basically she was basically saying that we sell these weapons to the First Order to make their money. And then they use that as a way to destroy. And that's how evil our world can be sometimes. I'm not a very political person, so I don't want to mention too much, but just I won't specifically state countries specifically, but just kind of look at different countries around the world and look at how they're using weapons as a way to intimidate. And they do it through the media. That is what this film is allegorizing for us as society as a whole. It's doing the same thing. And we're doing it through a unique and somewhat biased through this character of Rose. And I think that's what I'm trying to argue. Maybe I'm explaining it better than I actually was when I was reading it, and that's why I'm trying to go ahead and explain it in my own words now, instead of reading, from this piece of paper that I've written everything out. That is basically what I'm arguing. But it turns out that, at the end of at the Rise of Skywalker, spoiler alert, at the Rise of Skywalker, she was Palpatine's, daughter, but she ended up winning, and Kylo Ren did turn to the good side. So what she was feeling turned out to be correct. So it's good to take risk, and that's where my complication for my argument comes from. From the beginning, what I'm arguing is you need to be careful because, again, like I said, she was so caught up in wanting to believe that everything that she was saying and seeing was true. But what ended up happening wasn't. But what ended up happening was she ended up she didn't lose, but it was a close call. She almost was killed because of Snoke. Snoke tried to get Kylo Ren to kill Rey, which ended up not happening. So, that's what's interesting, in this film. And I think, Kylo Ren is saying to us that we need to let go of our past. I think that is an allegory for the franchise of Star Wars. As I mentioned before, Star Wars was the film that introduced the Hollywood blockbuster. Star Wars is what introduced this whole new cinema. Because way before we had the blockbuster, we had classical Hollywood. All these films before the blockbuster were all black and white. They weren't, they weren't falling. They weren't crashing. They weren't loud explosions. They were not immersive. Now, all this cinema is so immersive now, like Spider-Man, that when I was even going to this class at school, when I was originally studying these classical films, I was like so lost because I'm so used to the blockbuster cinema and films like Toy Story, films like Jaws, and of course Star Wars. So I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but basically to say that this is what I'm arguing, and that we as society are controlled, and through the military in this film, that's what exists in this world is the military. That's what the majority of the media is the military. Look at what's going on around the world. Look at what's happening. They're trying to scare us, and they're doing it through the media. And they're doing it through social media as a way to scare people. And I think that's what's interesting. And I think, I honestly, I don't hate, in my opinion, I don't hate that Rose was in there. Obviously I was kind of shocked by it too. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. They used a different character. We weren't not used to something like this because in all the other Star Wars films before it were not like that. So of course people are gonna, hate the film for this. But honestly, I think it's interesting. I don't hate it, but I'm not sure I love it either. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about her, but I do think it's interesting that they put her in there because honestly, I don't think it was an accident that they decided to put her in there. I think that their intentions, usually, in film studies, we don't have an intention. But honestly, I'm going to argue that I think, or not argue, I'm going to observe that I think, or not even observe, I'm going to make a stipulation that the filmmakers of The Last Jedi put her in there because not only this is the last film, but they wanted to end the Star Wars film on something different, on a unique note that, most of the Star Wars films are not like this. And that's what, I'm stipulating. And that's what I think is interesting. And they're using her, not only do they throw a unique character in, but they're using her through something that this film is showing us through social media. She's talking about the military. She's talking about what they did to her. And I think that's what's interesting. I didn't really mention this before, and this is not really my argument, but it's a small thing to recognize. She was at the casino. This was all, you could see the money that they were doing. Again, neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, basically the definition that Google defines it is free market capitalism. It is defined as the market making money and using money, through the economy. I'm not explaining it right because even I don't fully understand this term, so I'm only doing it. The reason why I've decided to throw this term into my paper, into my argument, is because of flexible networking, which I learned in the class. Flexible networking, can be interpreted in many different ways, but I'm interpreting it as, network, our internet, the media, and neoliberalism does contain the military. I didn't mention it in here. I do have it in my paper, but called the military-industrial complex. That's also part of this term, neoliberalism. And through the military, we make our money. That right there, I heard that when I was watching the film in Star Wars. I'm like, that is an allegory, an exact reflection of neoliberalism. When Rose stated that the military took this away from her, that was an exact reflection to what neoliberalism is, in the sense that they're doing the same thing. They are, this world is an evil place, and I think that's what she's basically saying, and that and I don't blame her. I do not blame her for saying that. This world does suck, but we do not have to live by it. But this is how this world is. And I think this is what the film is trying to show us. And the film, as I said in my argument at the beginning, I'm affirming that this film is critiquing us as society, but it is good to take risks once in a while. Because of Rey's risks, we ended up winning. And the franchise ended on a good note. So that is my argument. That is basically what I'm trying to explain. And, I'm hope, that this made sense. I hope I made sense, And as you know, I'm a Star Wars fan. I've posted so many videos on my channel, with all these things. But it's interesting that, I'm able to see, and the reason I'm arguing this is because I'm able to see these connections being made through this allegory of this film. And this is what the narrative of the film is telling us, through the characters, through the mise-en-scène. I really didn't briefly talk about Snoke, but again, another thing I mentioned, from the beginning, is through the media, Snoke took advantage, and I want to say this one more thing, and then I'll go ahead and end this video here. But Snoke took advantage, and the Force, I think, to put it in very simple terms, the Force is an allegory for social media, because it's the same. It's almost very similar. It's not the same, but it's very similar, because they both involve connection. They both involve being able to bring in psychologically motivated connections. And I think that's what's happening here. As you saw in the film, Rey and Kylo Ren were both touching hands abstractly through this mediation at a distance. And she was reaching out to Kylo Ren through this distance. And what's also interesting is that Luke is coming from a different point of view. Luke is coming from the original perspective of my argument, and that she should not be communicating, because look at how Luke, responded when Rey was communicating with. That was the final telepathy. But I think there were 4, if I remember correctly, 4 telepathy moments, and I think this was the final one. But what ended up happening is Rey was seeing that, and she wasn't wrong. She was right about this, that he did try to kill Kylo Ren because he felt that the dark side of the Force was arising in him. But it's still interesting to see, despite that, it's still interesting to see how Luke responded when she was even communicating, because from the beginning, what I took it as is she doesn't want him. And obviously, Yoda would not want, any Jedi communicating with the dark side of the Force to a certain point of view. But I know that Luke had to with Darth Vader, to win. So that is basically what I'm explaining, and that's, through all these forms, as I have explained, these forms are basically showing us, and Snoke, even admitted it, that she was being manipulated with. She fell for it, and that's why we need to be careful, and that's why this allegory is telling us that we need to be careful in the media, what we read. We need to be careful, because if we do what Rey did, it could hurt us, but we can still take risks. We just need to be mindful of it. And that's what I'm arguing with this film. I thank you guys for watching. And, if you have any questions, I know this is very complicated. There's so much going on here that I'm arguing. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. That is what I'm arguing for this film. And you guys were able to see, what I came up with for a long time, in this film class. And, it's interesting that and this is basically, I won't get into too much, but this is basically what film studies is. It's basically being able to use forms of film to create to create an image, historically, socially, or industrially. And obviously, this film is creating an image, which is an allegory of social media, creating an image that this is how the world is. With the military is using the media to scare us, just like Snoke did to Rey. But sometimes it's good to take risks. Thank you guys for watching, or actually, should I say listening, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace out.